Okay, I'm going to answer the question for you of how to make a really good, basic, old world, traditional French tart, fruit tart, okay? And this is certainly one of my favorite tarts. This is something I learned, almost 40 years ago, which kind of dates me a little bit, but in this class, we made some fine lining pastry, or in French called pâte à fin fine, and that is the dough that we're going to use for this tart. And I have it here, and it's a little bit cold. It's been in the refrigerator for a day. And first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to roll it out, and we're going to anchor it into a false bottom fluted flan pan, also known as a tart pan. Some people will call it a quiche pan. It goes under a couple of different names, okay? Now, this has a fair amount of butter in it, so it's a little bit hard. I'm going to use a little bit of flour to lubricate the table here. And I have two different rolling pins here. I have a tapered one, which I'm going to use, and I have a regular hardcore rolling pin that's not tapered, okay? You can use either one. I tend to like the tapered one because as I'm rolling the dough, I can put the pressure, apply the pressure to the dough and turn the pin so that I make the dough whatever thickness I want in the area that I'm rolling, see? And that's the advantage to the tapered pin, okay? Now I cut this dough in this class when I made it. If you look at that video, you'll notice that I flattened it out so that it was in the shape of the pan that I was going to roll it out in. Rather than put it in a ball, it's harder to roll out, especially when it's cold, okay? Now there's a couple of tricks to getting it into the pan properly, and I'm going to show you those. And this is kind of technical stuff here in terms of how you go about doing this. Now, how thick do you want it? You want it right about that thick. It's less than 1/4 of an inch, but I'm not so sure if it's quite 1/8 of an inch thick. You know what I mean? That might be a little too small. It depends what your use is. In this case, for the fruit thing, we're baking raw fruit and raw dough all at one time together in an oven. So you don't want this too thick because you don't want it doughy where the fruit is being cooked on top and getting dark, but the dough's not cooked yet. So that's why you don't want it too thick. All right, so I think I'm satisfied with this. I'll make it just a touch thinner. Okay, now, how to get it into the false bottom flan pan. First, we're going to anchor it against the sides with our hands, turning the pan. Now, you could just roll right over the top of this and would cut it. And you do that from time to time with certain types of tarts that you're rolling out. But what I want to do is I want to build the sides up a little bit more on this so that it has a little more structure on the outside. And it's a little bit higher than the pan. Because when I'm baking it, it's going to sink a little bit. And that way it'll be the same level of the pan when we're done. So here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra. You see here? You'll notice you can see the flan pan there. I'm going to go all the way around, give myself a little bit of extra dough here. I think this is important because when you're baking, like we're going to bake a strawberry, blueberry, and raspberry tart in here, these are juicy fruits, and they give off a lot of juice during the baking process. And you don't want the juice getting over the pastry and then getting on the other side of it. Okay? And now you can roll this out like this if you want. And that kind of cuts the dough. All right? Now, I'm going to take this extra dough that I have in here, and I'm going to build up the sides a little bit here, so that you'll notice here, it's above the rim of the tart shell. Okay, that gives me a little bit of room for it to relax and fall down during the baking process. See here? That wasn't too difficult. Now, I'm going to prick the bottom of the tart shell with a fork, because we don't want the thing swelling up. The heat gets in there, and it'll start pushing all the dough up. The purpose of pricking it with the fork is to give it a little bit of room to move without blowing up, because it will blow up on you sometimes. So that's why we're doing this. Okay, there you see. Now, we have very juicy fruit, strawberries, raspberries, and blueberries. So there's two things that I'm going to put in the bottom of this shell before I put the fruit in. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some sugar in there. That kind of will sweeten up the dough a little bit at the same time. The next thing I'm going to put in there is a little bit of flour. And I'm putting a little bit of flour in here because I want this flour will help absorb the juice a little bit of these juicy, juicy fruits. Now, not with not all fruit you would necessarily need to put the flour in there, but with this one you do. Okay, now we have some fairly large strawberries, almost too big for this tart, but what I do is when I want to clean the strawberries, I don't cut the bottom off with a knife. I take the end of the veg peeler and pluck out the stem. So I still have the whole strawberry here, and that will prevent the strawberry from leaking as much also. So we're going to line the outside perimeter of the shell with the strawberries. And then we're going to put a circle of blueberries, and we're going to put the raspberries in the middle. So in the final analysis, when you cut the tart, the first bite will be raspberry, the second and third bite will be blueberry, and the last bite along the crust will be the strawberry, you know? Now, you could make this tart all strawberries, or all blueberries, or all raspberries, if you wanted to. But I'm making a combination of all three just to make sure you can see there's more than one way to do it. Let's see if we can squeeze one more in here. Perfect, okay? Now, I'm going to take some blueberries. We'll put some blueberries in here. I'm stacking them up. I'm not laying them in a single layer because the fruit has a tendency to melt down a little bit and shrink on you. So you want to make sure you got enough blueberry in there. You don't want to overload it too much. You can end up with too much juice. Unlikely, though, and you'll see by the time we get around to cutting this. Okay, so now we got a circle of blueberries there with a hole left in the middle for the raspberries. And I'm going to put the raspberries right in that hole. You could do it in reverse. You could put the raspberries and the blueberries in the middle if you wanted. Okay, that'll work right there. Now, a little bit of sugar on the top, not too much, keeping in mind that this sugar is going to caramelize a little bit in the oven. We're going to cook this at 425 on a cookie sheet. And I'm going to show you as this tart's baking process is completed, how to determine when it's done. The main way you're going to do that is by, first of all, it's going to get brown, but the other way is that this crust is going to pull away from the sides of the tart flan itself, the pan itself. Okay, so we're going to pop this in the oven. This is obviously a time-elapse video. And it's in there at 425. How long is it going to take? It's probably going to take about 35 to 45 minutes. Now, if for any reason during this baking process, the fruit, particularly the tips of the strawberries, which are a little higher, start to get blackened, a little bit of black is okay. That doesn't mean it's burnt. That will actually taste good because you have the caramelized sugar on there. But if it gets a little bit too dark, you can take a little bit of foil and set it on the fruit part to prevent it from browning anymore while the pastry shell itself bakes. So for right now, I'll be back in about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and give you an update. We'll take a look at it, pull it out of the oven, see where it's at, put it back in if it needs to be, or we'll take it out, okay? Be back now. Okay, that fruit berry tart's looking really good. I'm going to bring it up here. We are going to put some foil on it because the fruit's starting to bake a little bit, and I'm going to show you what it looks like now. Now you'll notice, if you come down here, that it's pulled away from the sides of the pan completely. It's not brown enough or cooked enough for me, so what I'm going to do, but the top of this is starting to get like little black spots on it here, which are all good and delicious. I'm going to take a little piece of foil, set it over the top to retard the browning and blackening part of the fruit. Now I'm going to put it back in the oven for another 15 minutes or so to make sure that shell is baked just the way we want it, okay? Then we'll come back after that and get it out of the shell. Okay, the berry tart, strawberry, blueberry, raspberry is done. It looks really good. Here, off the foil goes. So I was able to continue cooking the crust. You'll see how it's completely pulled away from the sides of the pan. It's steaming right now. So this was taken out of the oven about 3 to 4 minutes ago. So it's still really, really hot. What I have here is a little cooling rack, okay? And I'm going to get this tart off of here. Now, if I were you, I'd be careful and probably let it set a little bit longer than I do, but I'm just a little bit more impetuous than probably you are. So let's get rid of this and that. Now, there's your tart shell. Now, let it cool a little bit longer than this, but I want to get it cooling faster, so I'm going to show you how to get it out. All you got to do is lift it right out of that shell. You want to get rid of that because this will help it cool on the cooling rack faster. You see how nothing is stuck anywhere? There's no juice on the sides of this baked. It never boiled over. It tried to. There's some that boiled right up to here. The reason it didn't boil over and then it's not stuck to the tart pan also is because I built that dough up a little bit so that it would be slightly higher than the edge of the flan pan. Okay, so let's get this hot little bugger onto the cooling rack. And we're going to let that cool. When I come back, I'm going to let it cool for at least a half an hour. And I'm going to show you how to glaze this tart. Then we're going to have to let it cool again. Then I'm going to show you a way of putting it on a plate. Okay? This tart certainly goes beyond having the illusion of health. This is a fairly moderately caloric dessert compared to a lot of other desserts. So this is like really one of my favorites, you know. So what I'm going to do in terms of the glaze is I went to the store, to the regular supermarket, which you're going to be able to do, and I bought a jar of red currant jelly. So I'm going to take some of the red currant jelly, I'm going to add a little water to it, chop it up a little bit, and bring it to a simmer. and then we're going to brush it or spoon it onto the tart. One thing about this tart that you definitely want to keep in mind, the nature of this tart requires, if you really want it to come across good to the person who's eating it, it needs to be eaten the same day that it's made. Unlike many, many, many other desserts, which can be refrigerated and brought back out, and microwaved, and all kinds of stuff done to them, this one tends to need to be eaten the same day. You'll never see a tart like this in a bakery, because the bakery can't afford not to sell this, because they need to sell it the same day it's made. So we'll be back in about a half an hour, and then I'll show you how to do the glaze on the top of the tart, which some people consider to be the most fun part of making the tart. Okay, the commercial supermarket version of making the fruit tart glaze for the fresh berry tart. I bought some Smucker's red currant jelly at the supermarket, and I'm going to put it in a little saute pan. I'm going to put the whole jar because I'm going to use some for a couple of things today. Yeah, let's put the whole jar in there. I'm going to add a little water to this so it doesn't start burning in the pan. And don't forget, if you put too much water in and it's too thick, let me put this on the stove while I talk to you. If you put too much water in, you can always boil it out with the jelly, because don't forget, when you're reducing the jelly that has too much water, the only thing that's going to leave the pan is the water. So what we're going to do is we're going to melt the jelly, then we're going to let it get to room temperature before we put it on the tart, so we know exactly what the final texture of the jelly will be when it goes on the tart. This tart is usually never refrigerated. You make it, you glaze it, you can let it sit at room temperature until you serve it that day. Okay? So we're going to test the texture of the glaze before we actually get it on the tart. So for right now, let's get it simmered. I'll be back in a couple minutes when it gets all melted together, and I'll show you what it looks like. Then we'll let it cool off a little bit. Or we can do this other John trick, which is take a little bit of it, put it on a plate, and put it in the fridge and see how it sets. That's one way of doing it. But since this particular jelly is never going to go in the fridge on the tart, I would prefer not to do that. But you can do that to see kind of, if you're in a hurry, to see what the texture of it will be like. So I'll be back in a couple minutes when this comes to a boil, and we'll take it from there. Okay, the currant jelly came to a boil, completely melted with the water, and I let it cook boiling for about a minute. Now we're going to let this come to room temperature. See, it's nice and smooth. Let's see what its glazing value and quality of the viscosity of the texture is like. Then we'll make a final determination as to whether or not it belongs on that fruit tart. Okay? It's going to take another 10 or 15 minutes, so I'll be right back in 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll take a look at it then. Okay, the red currant jelly came to the boil. Now it's back at room temperature. Zoom in on this down here. Now see, it's kind of syrupy and glazy like now, which is exactly what you're looking for to glaze that tart, see? Now you could spoon it on, but you could end up with more on there than you need sometimes doing that. And sometimes I do spoon them on. It depends which one I'm making. But I think for today we're going to use the brush, and let's glaze the top of the tart like this. Now remember, if the tart is too warm, when you do this, what happens is it melts the glaze down off the top of the pieces that you're glazing, and it doesn't look as glazed. So you want the syrup to be just the right texture and the tart not to be hot at all, so that the glaze itself sticks to the fruit and doesn't kind of melt on the fruit when you're putting it on. And after I get this on, we're going to let this set for a little while, and then I'm going to show you how to dust the perimeter of this by taking something that's circular, maybe even the bottom of the tart shell, setting it on top and dusting the edge, if you want to make a presentation with the entire tart rather than individual slices. But as you can see, the glaze is kind of the fun part. And it does add that finishing French touch and look to this particular dessert. It makes it, what I would say, in the mouth-watering type category, okay? And I think I got enough on there. Looks nice. Looks very nice to me. But what do I know? I made it, you know? So there you go. There's your fresh 3-berry tart baked with the pâte de foncer fine fine lining pastry and glazed with red currant jelly. We're going to let that cool and set a little bit. Then I'm going to put some of this on a plate with some whipped cream and some creme anglaise for you and some powdered sugar. And you better hope I don't eat that piece in front of you, because if I do, you'll know by watching me eat it just how good this is. So we'll be back in a little while when it gets set and cool, and we'll put some on a plate for you. How do they say? OMG. Oh my God. This tart is cooled and ready to slice and eat. So this is that blueberry, raspberry, strawberry action. Okay, let's cut it right down the middle. Let's cut ourselves. I'd say this is 6 portions, this particular tart size, you know. This is an 8-incher. Let's put the piece on there. So the first bite's the raspberry, next two are the blueberry, then the strawberry. Let's put a little bit of whipped cream on here. Or a lot of whipped cream. This tart cries out for whipped cream. Let's put a little bit of fresh vanilla sauce on there. Creme anglaise. And let's dust the back of this at least with a little sugar like that. There's as simple and as good and as fresh and as homemade as it gets. You make one of these for somebody, they'll follow you around for at least a month, okay? So there you go. Thanks for looking at this one. And I can't wait for this camera to be shut off because we're eating this right now. Enjoy it.